Ohio State, after being down 35-21 at halftime in the Rose Bowl, Ryan Day, I don't know what he said in the locker room, but it certainly worked because Ohio State came back and won 48-45 in one of the greatest college football games I have ever seen. It was amazing. It was the ultimate comeback victory. It was I would say, a program-defining moment for Ohio State as well, as a lot of people entering this game, including Ohio State fans, were questioning Ryan Day, were questioning the toughness of this program, and at the end of the day, Ohio State's still Ohio State. They're 11-2. They'll probably be bumped up to number 5 as Notre Dame lost, and they showed that they're an elite program. They have a lot to work on defense, but that's why they hired Jim Knowles. And I think entering this upcoming season, Ohio State is going to be a very dangerous team. The theme of this team is going to be vengeance is mine. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to review the Rose Bowl, talk about some of the key players, Jaxon Smith-Njigba and CJ Stroud specifically, and some others, and then we're going to discuss some takeaways from the Rose Bowl, a lot of which tie into this upcoming season. All of this is going to be tied into the future because I think this game, you have momentum now heading into the off season. I think a loss here might have dampened some things, put this team under pressure. There's obviously always pressure, but you don't have do this or else kind of pressure. You have, okay, we got this, let's just execute kind of mindset, I feel, from this. It was an epic win. I live reviewed this game, and it was a thriller. In the second quarter, after a atrocious first quarter by Ohio State, in which Utah scored 14 points, Ohio State scored nothing, and Utah was outgaining Ohio State very early in the yardage category. I think it was 100 to 150 to next to nothing in the first quarter. 14-0, Ohio State responds, Utah responds back, and then Ohio State really starts attacking Utah's secondary with a 50-yard pass to Jaxon Smith-Njigba from CJ Stroud, and then the magic begins. Within a minute and 5 seconds of game time, you have 28 total points scored in a quarter, in specifically a minute and 5 seconds in the second quarter. And it wasn't even Ohio State's defense to a certain degree. It was magical, honestly. A 97-yard kickoff return for Utah by Britton Covey in response to the 50-yard TD pass. Cameron Rising then responding to another 50-yard pass, 52 specifically, that happened after the kickoff return after one. It was just one play, 52 yards. CJ Stroud to Jaxon Smith-Njigba for a score. Cameron Rising, Utah has a 3-and-out, almost has a 3-and-out. 4th and 1, Cameron Rising runs, it's almost stopped, and he marches down the field 62 yards. Utah had a magical second quarter. No one could have prevented them from scoring 21 points. Yes, Ohio State's defense was atrocious. That's what it was, and you saw that, especially in the first quarter and parts of the second quarter. But that kickoff return, the 62-yard run, that was magical. And again, it showcased how Ohio State, poor defensive coaching all year, several broken tackles. Utah goes into halftime with a 35-21 lead, mostly because of a perfectly timed hit on Jaxon Smith-Njigba that caused a fumble that Utah recovered in the end zone. Ohio State comes out, scores 7 points. It's 35-28. At this point, Utah is slowed down, and in the fourth quarter, Ohio State outscores Utah 17-7. And the game ends in Ohio State's favor. That's basically how the game went. And at the end, Ohio State outscored Utah by 220 total yards, 683 to 463. They outgained Utah by 3 first downs. Utah still led with almost 9 more minutes of TOP, and Utah still won the turnover battle. It was just Ohio State's talent and second half execution and adjustments that really helped with the comeback and a win over Utah. A good Utah squad, by the way, who returns a lot of their starters next year, and along with Ohio State, will certainly, in my opinion, be playoff contenders. But that is really another conversation. So that's kind of the preview here, and now we're going to talk about the specific players. And by preview, I mean more so review. It's just kind of previewing what I was talking about, because we're going to talk about the Rose Bowl, which segues, of course, into kind of what I want to get to, which is how this Rose Bowl win ties into the upcoming season. So, first of all, the two key players here for the Buckeyes, CJ Stroud, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, both of whom are returning next year. Stroud, outside of one interception and another somewhat questionable throw that was into coverage, was perfect. 37 completions out of 46 attempts, 573 passing yards, which is a Rose Bowl record, possibly a bowl game record as well. 6 passing touchdowns, only one pick, a 223.8 passer rating. Keep in mind, that was without it was without the team's best offensive tackle. He was without Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. So he was shorthanded, still did amazing. Showed you why he was in New York. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba showcased why many thought he was America's best wide receiver, even with Garrett Wilson kind of overshadowing him. Same thing with Chris Olave, because Njigba is a sophomore. He's not even draft eligible, I don't think, until next year. And he had 347 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns on only 15 receptions, which is just pure insanity, because that means his average reception was for 23 whole yards. 23. His long was 52 as well. He constantly burned Utah's corners and safeties all day. Marvin Harrison Jr. as well saw extensive playing time, along with Emeka Egbuka. He saw something from Julian Fleming and Jeremy Ruckert, even at a pass to Mitch Rossi. So it was a good day, especially for the Ohio State pass game. These two, however, amazing, legendary. Their names are going to be inscribed in Rose Bowl history and Ohio State history forever because of this performance. It was phenomenal, and I got to watch it. I got to watch the whole darn thing. And these guys are going to be your leaders on offense next year. Got Trevion Henderson, too, who could be in that conversation as well. But just looking at how phenomenal this passing game is, I look at Stroud and Njigba, and that's what's going to pop in my mind first thing when I hear the words Ohio State's offense, is these two. Stroud, his mechanics, decision-making were near perfect. And Njigba adjusted for every ball, made perfect footwork, always making sure to keep one of his feet in bounds. It was just amazing. I mean, there were some catches where I thought guys might have stepped out of bounds, and Njigba never did. Harrison never did. I mean, what a job by Brian Hartline coaching his wide receivers. They did everything to perfection. And speaking of some other players too, you also got to give credit where it's due on the defense here. Ohio State had 1 sack. They had 3 tackles for loss, 1 pass defended. Tommy Eichenberg led the team with 17 total tackles. 11 of them were solo, and he had 1 tackle for loss. He was constantly making plays and stopping that Utah run game, which is powerful. You know, TJ Pledger and Tavion Thomas, even Micah Bernard as well, and Cameron Rising, all have run capability and are all a threat on the ground. And that Utah O-line is very strong as well. At the end of the day, Ohio State's defense in the fourth quarter and third quarter just said, enough. We're not going to let you push us around forever. And thankfully, that gave their offense enough time, and their offense, especially because of these two on the screen, are good enough at executing that they just did. They followed through, and they outscored Utah by just enough to win. And that's exactly what I said in my preview video for the Rose Bowl. All Ohio State's defense has to do is get enough stops on Utah to where their offense will score enough points, because I did not think that Utah's defense was going to hold Ohio State's offense to very few points. And my prediction was actually Ohio State 48, Utah 42. It was pretty darn close. Granted, I also picked Michigan to beat Georgia, but that's another story for another day. So that's kind of just previewing the key players. And a lot of these guys that I mentioned are also returning for next year, which is, it's phenomenal. This offense is going to be amazing. There are still some concerns, but here are the main takeaways. The future on offense with Stroud and JSN is bright. It's very bright. We kind of already talked about this with all those stats that I showcased there, but Stroud or Henderson and even Jaxon Smith-Njigba, seeing how, Devonta Smith, pardon me for that pause, won the Heisman in 2020, all these three guys could possibly win the Heisman. They could be the best player next year. His offense is explosive. Ryan Day still knows what he's doing. The play calling, which had been questionable at times from Day all year, was perfect for the Rose Bowl. Ryan Day knew who he was playing. He knew that Utah, because of talent and Ohio State, what people don't understand and didn't take into consideration when they picked Utah to blindly win because of all of Ohio State's opt-outs, even with the 24 scholarship players out, Ohio State has depth that Utah could only dream of having, and that's just facts. And even Kyle Whittingham would tell you that Ohio State's depth is so above of what most other programs are, and it was showcased during the Rose Bowl. So the future on offense is very bright. The offensive line I fully expect to do well. Mayan Williams and Trevion Henderson, again, coming back, they're going to improve, they're going to get better. That wide receiver core has plenty of depth. It did not skip a beat at all in this Rose Bowl game. I don't expect it to next year. This team is going to have an edge to it, a chip on the shoulder. And that leads into the next point, the next positive, where Ohio State showed they're still a tough team. Clawing back from a demoralizing, that second quarter, Ohio State was giving it all. And it wasn't enough. It was not enough. Ohio State scores a long touchdown. They perfectly scheme it. Utah casually marches down the field, punches it in for 6. That's the defense's fault. And then Ohio State's offense again does well on offense. And now it's not even the defense, it's the special teams. Kickoff, broken tackles, Britton Covey dances down half of the field after escaping the tacklers into the end zone, 28-14 Utah. Another long pass, another perfectly schemed drive that took one play, 15 seconds. Utah drives, gets to a 4th and 1 situation, is aggressive and goes for it. Cameron Rising is a 62-yard run, and the defense again messes up. And then Ohio State's offense messes up. You could tell they were trying, though, because it was another pass, perfectly schemed. Utah had a perfect hit, ball punched out. That was a demoralizing second quarter. I'm a Michigan fan. I wanted Ohio State to win. That was demoralizing. If you put Michigan in place of Ohio State, and I was there, I would have hung my head after that quarter. That was horrible. Everything Ohio State attempted to do, and they outplayed Utah in that second quarter. Utah immediately responded. They didn't give up, though. Third quarter, they outscored them 10-3. Small win. And then fourth quarter, the big one, they outscored them by 10 points and won the game. This team is tough. Very, very tough. And even with the lack of scholarship players, even with an injury where an Ohio State player was taken to the hospital, even with Jack Sawyer out with a targeting call, they came back and they won. And winning, whether it's by 3 or 17, it's the Rose Bowl. It's a win. This team showed that they cared. They showed that they have mental toughness. It's going to carry over into next year. And finally, Jim Knowles should have an immediate impact. Now, you can't get a lot of that out from the Rose Bowl, specifically like you can the other two, but I think you can get something out of the Rose Bowl. Not a whole lot, but let me explain. Ohio State has been essentially without a defensive coordinator since week 2, which is honestly for better because Kerry Coombs just sucked at his job. It was enjoyable seeing almost the ghost of Don Brown haunt Ohio State all year. It was comedy gold watching an offense, as a Michigan fan, watching my rival's offense beat enough teams to where they were in the top 10, and when we beat them, it was a top 2 win. But watching an offense be wasted by defensive ineptitude, it's not going to be that enjoyable next year. Because whatever Day said at halftime, that defense showed potency coming out of that locker room in the second half. They held an explosive, versatile Utah offense to 10 frigging points. 10 in the second half. Let me repeat that for you. 10 points after surrendering 35. 3 of those points were scored with Cameron Rising. 3. They held the starting quarterback to a grand total of 3 points. And they stopped Utah on 4th down too. They had a clutch stop. If they didn't stop them there, Utah might have had enough fuel in the tank to come out with the win. They didn't, though. The Ohio State defense made up for that poor, well, almost, not completely. They've somewhat made up for that awful first half. They came through. And not all defenses that are poorly coached and have a poor scheme can do that. Because eventually, when you play bad, it becomes habitual. They broke the habit in the second half, which means that Jim Knowles has guys with potential. He's not inheriting some completely wrecked group of defensive players. He's not. We saw potential from all sides. You have Denzel Burke there. You still have Ronnie Hickman there. Again, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer. I don't really know what grade or level Tommy Eichenberg is, but at this point, I'm going to assume that if Ohio State players were playing in the Rose Bowl, they were either seniors who really don't have much of an NFL future, or they're returning because of how many opt-outs there were. So there was a lot of positives. And the only concern is relating to the defense, specifically the first half. And it's how much will he be able to improve the defense? And it's only a concern because you don't know. You don't know. You can either, because you had 2 sides to the defense in the Rose Bowl, right? You had the second half where that defense combined with the offense could have won the whole national title if they could play 4 quarters like that. You play 4 quarters like you did in the second half of the Rose Bowl, you could beat Georgia, you could beat Alabama, you could beat Michigan, you could beat anyone with how well that second half was played. First half, though, no. You could lose to a whole of a lot more teams if you play the way you did in the first half, especially on defense. So there's such a variety, such a range, and we won't know because it's 1 year. It is one off season. You're losing guys. You're losing Haskell Garrett. I think you're losing maybe Tyreek Smith. I don't know exactly. Don't know the entire ins and outs. Let me know down below if I said anything incorrectly. But that's just my takeaways. And the concern really isn't even a concern because, in a certain sense, because I think there will be defensive improvement no matter what. I think that's a reasonable expectation to see this defense begin to have, an upward slope to it rather than continuing on its downward trend that we've seen ever since the beginning of 2020. So those are my takeaways kind of heading into this next season. And I think that, listen, Ohio State could very easily make the argument to be the number one team in the preseason. Very easily. They return a lot on offense, despite NFL draft production, which can, get into attrition and all that stuff, despite some losses on the D-line, coaching changes. Ohio State has, what would be a way too early top 25 that I have not made, they would very well make, in my opinion, the case to be my number one team. The Rose Bowl was huge. And I have a feeling that we might look back on this game and say that this was the beginning. This is where Ohio State kind of put their foot in the ground after a shaky season and had one heck of a ride in 2022. So we'll see. I'm a Michigan fan, but this is kind of me being unbiased here and saying what's possible. What can Ohio State do? And putting that from a perspective of how the Rose Bowl game went. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. What did you think of the Rose Bowl game? I was impressed by it. Sure, the defensive performance in the first half was atrocious. The offensive performance in the first quarter was not the greatest. But excluding that, this was an amazing game by Ohio State against a Utah team that I continued to say on my live stream has been playing like a playoff contender since they switched to Cameron Rising. This is a good, great, approaching elite Utah team. And Ohio State beat them. And that's something that you should be proud of, especially when you realize that you won the Rose Bowl and went 11-2. So what do you think? Comment down below, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You guys know the drill. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later.